to Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 54, and this is going to be kind of an interesting special episode I'm doing with my daughter. So we're going to hear talk about daddy-daughter stuff, how I failed her as a father, how I did some good things and some bad things, and just kind of go through that kind of stuff. So I thought this would be fun to get her on and to talk some of those things. So Miss Faith Davis, thanks very much for joining me.
I'm excited to be doing.
So weird, isn't it, to be on a little podcast, right? So we had talked about doing this for a while. So one of the things I like to do with all the guests, you included, is kind of introduce yourself, tell all of us who you are, how old you are, what you do for a living, all that stuff.
Great. Well, my name's Faith. I am the spawn of Kevin Davis here. I'm 24, living in Atlanta. I work as a paramedic, and I'm going to school for pre-med stuff. Hopefully we'll make it to be a doctor someday. And that and my 2 cats is most of what I do with my time.
And your boyfriend, right?
Yes.
Jonathan. We're going to put
Shout
out here. Shout out to Jonathan. Actually, I'm going to try to get Jonathan on here at some point, too. That kid represents what I think all young men should aspire to right now. So that's pretty high praise, right? But
yeah, that's a lot coming from you.
So we talked a little bit about, so I think that this would be a great episode just to reach out and talk to dads about, kids in general, but in particular, dads raising daughters, right? So we've had our times when things were great and times were not so great. And, full disclosure, Faith and I tend to be a lot alike, which has created some interesting exchanges. We have a little bit of, we need a safe word when we have conversation because she and I can get into it a little bit. So, but I want to kind of educate the guys that are listening and women that are listening about kind of what it's like having a daughter and what it's like as a daughter, what you would love to have as your dad, right? Like you've grown up now, you're 24. When you turned 13, 14, your head was spinning around and you were, Satan, Spawn, and all that kind of stuff, which is a joke. But yeah, when you turn 13 or 14, which all girls do.
It's a rough time.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a rough time for all of us. But tell me kind of what you think are some of the things that I did well and things that I did not do so well in the context of if dads are kind of in that 12, 13-year-old, and let's talk about kind of that time frame first, and then we kind of move on to as you've gotten into adulthood.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it too, because of my thinking on it now is so different than I felt at 13, 14, because your world is just so different. I think I would kind of, I thought about it a little bit before doing the podcast. I think I would describe it very much in the sense of like, you have always been so good at there's never been a doubt in my mind that if I needed you for anything's practical, anything went wrong, if I had any question about nuclear physics, I would just assume that you know the answer. Because that's kind of, I think, like the daddy's my hero kind of thing is still very pervasive even when you get to that age. But I think something that probably a lot of dads struggle with their daughters, which I think we did as well a little bit, is kind of the emotional connection part, like that emotional need. Because I had no doubt in my mind that you were there for everything that I needed, that you were going to protect me, that you would protect me from any other boys, that would hurt me, any of those things. But I think we struggled, and probably a lot of people do, with kind of building that connection during especially that like 13, 14 period of your life. Because young girls just go through so much stuff that I don't think dads have ever experienced. So it's just simply like, how do you as a dad sit and listen to the kind of crap your 13-year-old wants to talk about?
Yes.
But at 13, 14, especially for me and you, like we've always butt heads more, but I very much always I kind of always looked up to you the most. And so I wanted so much more that like to feel like you cared and understood about those things. And not that I didn't feel that you did, but I think kind of that's one area I think maybe if we had learned a little sooner how to like sit and connect a little more on some of those emotional stuff that maybe didn't matter as much to you at the time. But for me, when you're 14, 13, that's your whole world.
Yeah.
But I think the nice thing was that even in absence of that a little, some of that misunderstanding, that all that other stuff, like I never had any question that you were going to be there.
Well, yeah. So talk to me, let's dig into that a little bit. So as far as that, so a 13, 14-year-old girl, if they're dads that have daughters out there right now, the daughter's not going to come up and say, hey, Dad, I'd really like to have a better emotional connection with you. And this is how, these are some of the things I'm going through and all that. But I think dads, myself included, I would have done what I needed to do had I known that, right? Like, so had I known that I was missing the boat on that emotional connection, because I'm not an emotional guy, typically. Like I am when it comes to mom, movies about dogs. Those
real dogs.
Real dogs. We're actual dogs. But I'm not really, I'm pretty even killed, right? Like the big joke in our family is that, you know, you can tell mom something and she'll be jumping up on the table, screaming how awesome it is. And my response is what?
Cool.
Right. Yeah. And that's pretty much for everything, right? Like I just don't get. Yeah. And so it's not that I'm emotionally stunted or emotionally disconnected. It's just I tend to be pretty even killed. And so for me, having that strength and maintaining that strength was probably primarily my focus. Explain to people, explain to me what things the 13, and I will point out that you're 10 years removed from that. However, not much has changed. And actually, it's probably getting harder for 13, 14-year-olds. That are going through it now, but kind of walk me through some of that stuff so that in a context of how a dad would be able to be there better, emotionally available, and to be able to approach their daughter to build that connection when the daughter a lot of time is like, get the crap away from me. I don't want anything to do with you. We called it when, the Heisman Trophy thing, which is like that, at arm's length. So walk me through some of that.
That's a really good question, Dad. No, I think the first thing that comes to mind is when I reflect on the times of and I think first of all, I think every kid's going to be different. Because the way you connected with Kenzie, my older sister, and me was also completely different. But at least for me, I think of the times when I felt most connected to you. And for one, I think the big thing was having time that was just the two of us, that was you were there because you wanted to be there, not because you had to be there. So, one thing we actually just did when I was here was, our donuts with Dad. Yeah. Which is something we started when we were really little, but continued to do that. There was a time every 2 weeks that I knew, no matter what, I was going to get to have time to sit and just talk your ear off about whatever I wanted to. Yeah. And no matter what, unless you were sick or something, you were always there. You made that time. Yeah. And I knew that, that wasn't because you were trapped in your office and I had to sit and just talk at you, but it was because you said, let's go do something. This is just for me and you. I'm going to sit and we're going to talk. Yeah. So stuff like that, or even just, I think, especially at those ages, I feel like you just want to know that either of your parents, you want to know that they give a crap about the stuff that you give a crap about. And the reality is they don't. But if you can pretend, so even, when we would come home from the mall with our new clothes, you could care less about what we actually bought. But I remember we would always come, we'd say, Dad, we're going to do a little fashion show for you. Yeah. And we would go and you would spend the 30 minutes or whatever. You'd sit there in the bedroom and you'd probably say cool to every outfit. But regardless, when we walked in the room with our new little outfit, you put down phone, book, whatever. You've looked, you're like, wow, look at that. That does look good. And it was a little thing, but that response is so different than all right, cool. And then going back to whatever it was. Yeah. It's just that little bit. And I'm sure as a parent, when you have 1,000,001 things going on, it's probably hard to care about Taylor Swift or, Legos or whatever's going on TikTok or those things. Mm-hmm. But by taking the time in those little ways, I think that consistently helped. And I'll think on the flip side, because we can't grow your ego too much, we'll say one thing that I think didn't help. And so Dad used to always do this thing when I would start talking, when I would tell my stories. And I was a little wordy. as a child.
You tell some of the longest stories of all time.
No
Now
demand.
this is not good parenting. She's going to describe the exact opposite of good parenting. Go ahead.
Well, it was warranted in retrospect. But so we would talk, our kitchen is right next to his office, and I'd start a story in the kitchen, and it'd go on for a long time. And when the story started to get too long, he would take his hand and start doing this, which was like the director's signal for like, it's time to round it up. He'd start doing that, and then he'd start walking over to his office. And when he crossed the threshold between the kitchen and the office, once that last foot was on the carpet,
I was out.
Your story was done. There was no further storytelling. Now, granted, good parenting, I learned to tell shorter stories. Bad parenting, sometimes Dad didn't listen.
That's true. I have a short attention span. You tell very long stories.
Yes.
So the better approach for me would have probably been to say, look, I only have like 5 minutes to have this conversation, so you need to be succinct with this story.
Highlight reel.
Yeah, I can't spend the next 15 minutes for you to tell me this story.
Yeah.
Now, the other side of that is I should just have slowed down and been more patient and listened.
On a few times, but I also think like some of our experience is going to be so much different because I was very fortunate as a kid to have both you and Mom here all the time. Yeah. So I think I did struggle to grasp the concept that you had a job, to be honest, because in my perspective, you kind of just played on the computer all day in your office and hung out with the dogs. So why would you not have time to listen to my story about someone in my 6th grade class? That feels illogical.
Right, because like I've been self-employed for like 25 years. I've had my home office the entire time you guys grew up. So I was here all the time. Michelle, Mom, was a stay-at-home mom, still a stay-at-home homemaker, but so we were here all the time. And to your perspective, what was I doing all day, right?
Listen to my stories, apparently.
Play on the computer for sure. Well, I mean that's really good advice, and I think the dad donuts with dad's thing is a great example. And we should have done more of those things. But if it's not donuts, it could be shooting hoops with your kid. And this is dad, we're talking about daughters right now, but with sons too, but shooting hoops. But it's different, I think. So you need to have an opportunity to have that emotional connection, not just a physical connection, which you can be kind of gender specific and say boys tend to like the more physicality part of it. Girls tend to like more the emotional connection, especially when they're, preteens, teens, and beyond. So I think there's tons of opportunities to do that. One of the things I think you and I did, and we went to, there's a picture right over there when we took the little daddy-daughter dance thing. But I think that one of the things I tried to teach you, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, is kind of that dating aspect and how doing that, like, going on dates with your daughter to show her that kind of stuff. I don't know if that was valuable or.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's more of a representation of just like, I don't know, what does it look like when a man cares about you in your life? And that can be any male friend, partner, dad, coworker, whatever. But just because men and women do tend to show care and affection differently. So that is very common, like, because I think I've even had, like, even with my current boyfriend, he works quite a bit. And so, and also, again, kind of works with mine very similarly. And so I see that reflected very similarly. That I remember feeling the most cared for when you said, I'm going to put down my work. We're going to leave the house and go do something together. Or even if it was at the house, this is the time when work is done. I'm not going to be on my phone and doing this and spending time with you. Kind of separating those out was times when I felt most like, like he's excited to be here. He wants to be here. And even now as an adult, I see that reflected in like when Jonathan puts down his work and says, okay, work time's done. Now we're going to go on a date. Now we're going to do something. And so I think like and honestly, I think you did a really good job with that. Like as much as you did work, you always found a way to structure your work so that you still had time for us. And so like going on those little dates and stuff, I think it was just really the message that like, it's important that someone who cares for you makes time for you, regardless of how busy they are.
Right.
And that was kind of the baseline message. And aside from that, there's all the little stuff of just like, we kind of like some of the more traditional, like, opening the car doors and, just those kind of little things. And I'll say I definitely, from the dating side, did not always follow that when dating certain people. But I will say that your example of how you treated mom and how you treated us is what allowed me to recognize that when hopefully Jonathan's pretty great. I think I found a pretty great partner, and I was able to recognize that very quickly when I saw it because it was a direct reflection of you.
Well, and I've talked actually on the podcast a couple of times about this text that you sent me for Father's Day, right? And I think that I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I think one of the things we talk a lot about on the podcast is this, cherishing your wife, right? Like, I talk a lot about cherishing her, respecting her, doing things for her. And there's this whole weird dichotomy now between, like, if I open the car door for her, does that mean she's weak? Well, no, it doesn't. It means I respect her enough.
Yeah.
And want to give her that. And I think, like you just kind of alluded to, you've come through a series of guys that are not necessarily the same standards that I would set for my own life. Let's say that. But when you started to describe your current relationship, his mother taught him to open doors for women. He's very respectful and takes care of things and all that. And so I made the joke and I said, it's great that you finally have a man that you're dating. Because in my mind, obviously that's my definition. And we talked a little bit about different definitions, but in my mind, like, that care, it's not about masculinity or physicality or anything like that, but it's about how he treats you. Talk to me a little bit about that and about how the way that I treated mom, good or bad, kind of shaped the way that you see your own relationships.
Well, I think it's very well reflected in the idea that you do those things for mom, just like Jonathan does those things for me, because you care and because you want to, and it's an expression of love, and not because you don't think she can. And for Jonathan, also not because he doesn't think I can. I think, that's a much broader conversation, but just how important I think it is that that's kind of coupled with, like, and I think same for dads and daughters, allowing your daughters to feel empowered, but also saying, like, I know you can, but I'm also going to do it for you because I want to, because I care for you, not because you're not able. So same with our relationships, you taught us how to do all sorts of stuff. We know how to change a tire, all that stuff. And I've never had to change one because I've always had someone, you or a man or someone else in my life, or even my sister, who cared for me and did it for me instead. But I think that was consistently reflected with, like, not only have I seen you do all those things for mom, like all those traditional, like, gentlemanly things, which are just acts of love and caring, but the bigger impact is how much we've heard you talk up mom on the daily. You're always telling her what a badass she is. She's in your phone as my hot wife.
Actually, Hot Wife Smoke Show.
Wow, it's not great. But, like, in 24 years, I have never heard you say a single disparaging thing about mom, around her or not around her.
Yeah. And
I've also, and it's just, and even how you talk about other women, and I see you do the same things within respect to things like opening doors and, that kind of just similar stuff. You do those things for other women too, because that's just something you do out of respect.
Right.
And you're not doing it to get something. I think that's something important too.
Yeah.
And so it's just like those little things, but how you treated mom and the time you took for her and the priority you put to her. And I think most importantly, how you spoke about her when she wasn't around is something that kids are very aware of. And I knew, even when I was in relationships that weren't right for me, even if they were with decent guys, I didn't necessarily know that they weren't right for me at the time, but I could tell, and I was like, it's not quite
right
what it should be. And I couldn't put my finger on it until I met Jonathan. And I immediately was like, there's been so many little things, and he's amazing in his own capacity, and there are ways he's definitely not like you that appeal to me a little bit more. And but there are a lot of in those similar vein. Like, there were so many little things I was like, oh, the only other guy in my life that's ever consistently opened a car door, or that has ever talked about me this way, or that I've ever seen treat a woman this way. So in ways that you treated mom, it's like, oh, that's my dad. Like, that's so something my dad would do. And that was a green flag. That was something that was positive because of how awesome your guys' relationship was. Right. So that was something I recognized it when I saw it. But just because you did those things right doesn't mean your daughters are going to listen to you for at least a decade.
Well, okay, I'm getting smarter as things progress, right? As you get older, I get smarter, I think, maybe a little bit.
That's not me.
But, I think that setting that, the important thing, I think, as a dad, and we have different relationships with sons. I have 2 daughters, so I have never raised a son.
Thank
but,
God for that.
yeah, for everybody involved. God knew I needed daughters, let me just say that. But I think setting that baseline standard for what that relationship looks like. And I think a lot of times, we're getting ready to do this marriage workshop coming up pretty soon. But I think what a lot of men miss in their relationship with their spouse is how important that sets the tone for the entire family. Right?
Yeah.
That really sets the baseline, not only for that security, right? You made the statement that you always knew that mom and I were solid.
Yeah.
Right. So having that solid baseline, but then showing you kind of, hey, this is what it can look like.
Yeah.
So as you're going through those relationships that don't necessarily measure up or not necessarily right for you, like how do you reconcile that? Like, what is your thought process as a young woman? And, you and I had a very frank conversation with, early on in a relationship, right? Where you were more than one, where you were like, hey Dad, this is the situation.
Yeah.
And then you said, what do you think? And I go, do you really want to know what I think? Which I thought was respectful. Yeah. And then I told you exactly what I thought, and you did the exact opposite anyway, which tends to be what young women do, or kids do, right? So, but in your mind, how do you reconcile, and obviously we all go through different relationships differently and approach those things, but how do you reconcile as you're going through these relationships to say, I know it's not quite there, but I'm going to stick around and try to make it work anyway? This is kind of good fodder for dads trying to give, you can't really give dating advice to your daughter, but you can kind of give this perspective. So I'm wondering if that might help somebody out there.
I think for me, I just as a person am I will say that in a good way, I got to see a lot of both you guys and a lot of other couples, married adults in my life growing up. Like, I knew virtually no one that was divorced. We just grew up in a community that wasn't something we saw a lot. So in a good way, I had an early commitment to what it meant to be in a partnership. Mm-hmm. And I've always taken dating very seriously, probably in some ways more seriously than I should have from an early age. So I think for me, that was a good thing, and I think will be very positive in the right relationship. That wasn't the most positive in the wrong relationship, because I think we heard a lot from you guys just about kind of the importance of that, like taking it seriously, which is a very positive thing. But I don't think I learned a lot about what an unhealthy relationship looks like, what abusive relationships look like, just what it feels like when you're not with the right person. Mm-hmm. So I had such this positive mentality and this big commitment to staying with a partner. And so I actually ended up staying in relationships way longer than I should have, because I had this almost marriage level commitment and drive within myself for a relationship to pretty much anyone I dated seriously, regardless of whether it was the right thing. So I think that was almost one disadvantage, was seeing so many positive relationships, and we only ever really talked about the good, right? We talked a lot about this is what it looks like when someone treats you well, yada yada. And I'd say the people that not all, but most of the people that I dated seriously had some semblance of that. I wasn't dating maybe once or twice. I wasn't dating total pieces of crap across the board. And so there was some semblance last time I was like, oh, I see this good thing in them that does reflect this good thing that I've seen before that I would want in a long-term relationship. So, and I know long-term relationships do have ups and downs. So why would I not stay in this relationship? Because why would I just give up on this person when we could work through these things? Yeah. And that, I think, is a healthy perspective when you're with the right person. But I think I would have really benefited from some more, education, because not really representation is right, but just more education on those things. Like, what does it look like when it's wrong? And, what should you look out for? And how do you, I don't know how you would learn those things. Most people learn by experience. Mm-hmm. Right? But for me, that's where I just held on, because I saw so many positive relationships that I kind of just had this idea that you can work through anything if you're both committed, which I guess is true. But in most of those,
Well, and I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's making that distinction. I wish that we've made the distinction between, because we've had this discussion. It's like, hey, so and so and I are going to go to counseling. And I'm like, you guys have been dating for like 7 months.
yeah,
Like making the distinction between that stick-to-itiveness and that commitment in a marriage
yeah,
versus a dating relationship that is or isn't necessarily going to lead to marriage,
Yeah.
right? And so I think being able to make that distinction probably would have been more helpful. And honestly, I don't really know how to do that other than having the conversations. Because if you're doing a great job of working through marriage issues and you have a really strong, great marriage, it's kind of ironic that you would think that that's nothing but a positive message, but it actually can be like reinforcing this stick-to-itiveness, for lack of a better term, that you stay in a relationship whether or not you didn't really need to stay in the relationship.
Well, I think in the terms of dads and daughters, and I mean just parents and daughters across the board, I think something that may have helped for me is if I had felt a little more like you guys wanted me to do what was right for me, not just what you thought was right.
Right.
Because I think that kind of, and it depends on the kid. I'm kind of a little bit, I don't know if rebellious is the right word, but I kind of have a little bit of a strong-headedness to me. And I think for a long time I felt very much like there is only, from you guys, that there was only one right way. There's only one type of guy we want you to date. There's only, they have to.
It took you like 10 years to find that guy.
Yeah, and that's begrudgingly you like this one. But, so when you were coming to me and saying, oh, I don't like this guy for XYZ, I think in those times, I don't feel like I heard, are you happy?
Right.
Is he treating you well? Do you see a future with this person? I don't think I heard a lot of questions from you guys as to how I felt. I think I heard a lot of input as to why, he doesn't do XYZ, or he doesn't believe XYZ that we believe, or that he doesn't do this. And although those were genuine concerns, and those probably did apply to my situation, when it comes from as a kid hearing it from your parents, the message I was hearing was, oh, this guy just isn't what my parents want for me.
Great.
But why is it my responsibility to do what they want for me? Right? But if I had heard, I think if it had been posed in a question, if you had sat down and been like, does it really make you happy the way this situation's working? And I may have tried to argue my way out of it, but that one would have been helped me do a little bit of my own thinking. So you could have tricked me a little bit into thinking for myself, and that would have maybe helped me not do so much of the rebellious part of things. And then I also think I would have more genuinely felt like you guys were saying that, because even though I know in the grand scheme of things, as an adult, I know everything you said was because you cared. But at the time, it felt a lot more like you guys just wanted me to do what you wanted me to do because it fit your definition of what was right. But if I heard things in a little bit of different way, and if it had really been emphasized, we care about what makes you happy, even if it's not what we agree with, which may not totally be true, but if it had been kind of framed that way, I think I would have been more receptive. Because everything you said was right. Don't repeat that. But everything you said was right about the people that I dated, and they weren't right for me, but I wasn't receptive to hear it in that way.
Which is ironic, because with the one in question we were talking about, that was a situation where you actually told me all your feelings, and I asked, hey, are you emotionally fulfilled in this relationship? Are you doing these things? And so, and then you summarily ignored what we talked about.
Well, we didn't have that conversation until probably 2 years.
Yeah, it was like a year and a half in, and then what I'm interested in is wondering whether or not, even though you asked for that input and I gave you what really was not, it was probably mixed with my opinion as well as, hey, this is, like, I don't, from everything you're saying, this is not meeting your emotional needs, and I don't foresee it, like, I don't see a path for it to do so.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? But yeah, it's all that to say, dads out there, parents out there, when you're talking to your kid, it's a complete moving target, right? Like it really is trying to gather that information, figure out how you feel, realize that there is going to be a rebellious side in that, and kind of, because my parents said this, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Or whatever, right?
But actually, to your point of mentioning that conversation and the subsequent many others, it may have seemed to you like that was a futile conversation. She's not listening to crap I say anyways. But those were some of the most helpful conversations for me, because that's stuff I actually listened to. And it may not have seemed like it, because all I'm going to do is, and with me and you, I'm going to try to save face with you every time, because we're really similar, and I don't ever want you to be right. Just naturally, that's just how it's going to be. And so I'm going to argue with you a lot about that, because that's how it works. But those conversations were the most helpful, and is what really allowed me to start that process on my own of thinking through, like, oh, am I emotionally fulfilled? It's like, and I really, in that relationship we're talking about, I started, because of those conversations and other things, I started thinking about things from a long-term relationship perspective that I had never really considered before. Those other questions used to be much more shallow when I was evaluating relationships, and it started to help me evaluate them more deeply. And on a parental side of things, the biggest thing in all of that was that no matter how many times, to your chagrin, I came to you and asked you those questions or had those exact same conversations repeatedly, you and Mom were still there. We're still answering the same questions, having the same roundabout conversations repeatedly, and many times as I needed for it to have the resolution that it did. Yeah. But that was way more important, because for parents, your kid's going to go through crap whether you want them to or not.
Right.
There's no magical words you're going to say that is going to make them make the choice you think they should make, or even make the right choice for themselves. They still have to go through their process. But I think that strengthened our relationship a lot, that no matter what, I knew, and that was kind of that we talked about earlier. Maybe as a kid, I knew more that you were there for that protective side, the practical side, whatever, but not so much the emotional side. Whereas you continually answering the phone and not getting annoyed with me and agreeing to answer my questions no matter what, that strengthened that emotional side of things. And that also helped to give another representation of this man in my life, my dad, who loves and cares for me, will sit and listen to me on these things. Yeah. Maybe in this other relationship with a different man who does care for me isn't doing that. That doesn't line up. Right. And that helps as well.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I mean, I was in, with that particular conversation that we've had and subsequent others, I tried to be very deliberate to ask you questions that would be more about you, because I tend, like you, this is my opinion, this is right and wrong, this is black and white, this is what you should do, kind of thing. And I have to battle against that to not be that way. Yeah. I think a lot of guys in general, but dads especially, want to be right. I'm 51 years old. I've been around the block. I've made these mistakes. So it's my job as a dad to help you not make those mistakes, which is true, not necessarily true, can be somewhat true, but the way to do that is more of, how do I expose your feelings and your desires and your needs to you in a way that you then can make your own choices. And obviously there's going to be consequences to whatever choices they get. So for sure. So that's good. So let me go back to the 13 and 14-year-old daughter. What kind of things, and I want to go from there to right around graduating to our adult relationship now. What advice would you give to dads in dealing with these? And even before that, whether, let's say, preteen to 14, kind of what can you tell dads about daughters in particular?
It's a hard question. Good luck. I'm so sorry for you. No, I mean, I think in those younger years, I think the things that were most important was just the being there, being available, showing up when you could. Mm-hmm. And for the little things, you let us paint your toenails, you showed up to do playtime with us for certain things, like the daddy-daughter dance and donuts with dad. You were there for all those things. And I also understand that not every parent can be there for all those things because life. And we were fortunate that you were able to work from home. That gave some more schedule availability. But I mean, I think even parents who work more and those things, you can, if you listen to your kids, you'll know what's really important to them. Yeah. And you never missed anything that was really important to us. I can't think of a single thing that you weren't there for. So all those little things were important. A little bit of placating to what we liked, even if you didn't like it. But just kind of making your kid feel, and you did make us feel that way, but making them feel like they matter.
Yeah.
And like, I think little girls in particular, like, you just want to feel like you're the light of everyone's life. At least for me. I just wanted to be the star.
As the baby. The baby, for sure. Yeah.
As the baby, I wanted to be the shining star in everyone's life. And kind of being allowed to feel that way and not being rushed away. Those moments are where it felt the best, right? And then I think kind of in that preteen, teen age, parents obviously have already been through all that. They know nothing you're talking about is nearly as big of a deal as you seem to think it is. But again, some of that, like, like your kid's experiencing all this stuff for the first time. Like, you've maybe as an adult been through a bunch of heartbreaks. You know that 13-year-old boys don't matter. But like, your child does not know that, and they feel like their world is crumbling. And being there and treating them as like that's real for them. Like, this is probably the worst thing they've ever experienced. Yeah. So give them the love and care and time and attention as if it is the worst thing they've ever experienced. And, you know, if your kid doesn't want to talk to you, don't make them talk to you. Give them that space. Show them you recognize they're their own person. They may need time. But by, you know, that work of creating that relationship started by being there when they were a kid. Being available consistently says that even when I'm a pissed off teenager and I don't want to talk to my dad, I know in the back of my head, he's there if I do want to talk to him. That choice is mine, not because he's not available to you. And so then you kind of work that way. But yeah, I think just still making time for those things. And I think kind of that graduation into young adult, I think that was very hard. That was hard, period. But I think just that reaffirmation or encouragement of like, you are your own person. You can make your own decisions. And like focusing on building that adult relationship. Because I have a lot of friends even now that are in their 20s whose parents still treat them as though they're at home. And not for a bad reason. The parents do have a lot of good things to say. But I think you guys you kind of were like the mama bird that just yeets their kid out of the bird nest. It's like, fly, bitch. But, you know, just kind of like giving them that push and the space to kind of find themselves. Like, I think one of the best things, you and Mom had seen a therapist years ago who you were kind of trying to decide if you wanted to be in Montana or Miami. And they had basically encouraged you to stay for like 5 years while Kenzie and I were transitioning into our new lives and kind of be that launching pad for us into adulthood. And you guys did, and you committed to that, and just kind of nothing else changed about you guys or mom and dad or life here. So when your kid's 18, 19, 20, 21, and everything in life is changing, but the parents made the sacrifice of not changing anything big, staying in the same house, like those things, which isn't always possible.
Yeah. But
that decision on your guys' part was huge for us. Because when things happened, I knew that nothing was changing here. Like, I could come back home if I wanted to. Like, if I had moved to Atlanta and nothing worked out, I could have moved back home and had a place to stay. You know, those things. And so that gave a lot of comfort and security. Because, I mean, you know, nothing you say to your kid is going to change what they're going to do on their own in that time. Yeah. But, like, just being there and having already developed that relationship for them to know that they can rely on you.
Yeah, I think that's important because, and I've told this to younger parents too, which my wife made me stop telling younger parents this, but like ultimately, and we were just talking about this, you met with a teenager today who is going through some of these issues, right? And ultimately, your actions have very little real-time logistical effect on the behavior of your kid.
Yeah.
Right? Like but it can have long-term, right? Like that's the thing that as you guys become adults that I'm now starting to realize, because when you've got young teenagers, preteens, 16, 17-year-olds, you're like, this sucks and it's going to suck forever. Right? Like I joke, the joke I always tell is like, God made teenagers in such a way that you want them to leave home as much as they want to leave home. Because it's just like, it's hard. So any dad that's out there right now that's listening to this, that's going through this, there is hope at the end of the rainbow. Stick to what you're doing. If you're not doing the things that we're talking about, continue to do that and to be that launching pad. That launching pad statement was amazing for us because we never really thought about it. we were going through a time when a huge hatred of winter. We live in a place that has winter 7 months out of the year and all that kind of stuff. We didn't really know what we were going to do. But that discussion helped with part of the epiphany that I went through. One thing I will also say is if you send your preteen and teenager or early teenager to a foreign country for a length of time, that also can help your relationship as well.
I strongly agree.
So Faith went to Costa Rica for 2 different stints of 12 weeks. So you were there for 6 months to learn Spanish.
At 15 and 17.
15 and 17, which was actually part of, we had done this sort of say yes to life thing.
Yes.
And so I think that was really good for you to be able to do that and to establish that, the launch pad, right? Like you were going to come back home, but you got to go out and experience something. We would talk to you, not even daily, like a few times a week, maybe. This was pre-FaceTime, so we didn't really have that going on, or we did a little bit going on. But I feel like that was part of that, yeeting out of the nest.
Oh, it's huge.
Kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, that was huge for my independence, my growth as a person. I matured a lot by getting to do that. And I think just kind of that whole say yes thing has been a big thing for us because I don't remember virtually ever coming, and we always joke that I have a new life plan every week because I'm a big dreamer like you, and I'm just constantly coming up with new things I would love to do with my life. And especially as a teenager, that was very rampant.
Yeah.
But every single time I came to you guys with some sort of big dream, we would sit around in the kitchen, we'd talk for 5 hours about Faith's new life plan. I always did my research. I had all the stats. This is what I want to do. This is why I'm going to do it. I did the same thing with Costa Rica. And you guys listened, and your response was, Mom was typically in distress. And your response, though, was typically like, all right, like, let me call somebody. Let me get my contacts. We're going to make it happen for you. And I think it was, again, kind of an example of that reaffirming, like, and even to this day, that, like, even if you don't agree with it in those aspects, I knew that you were never going to discourage me from the stuff I want to do. And that started with, like, most kids couldn't go to their parents and say, I'd love to go to Costa Rica by myself at 15 and go study Spanish and live with some strangers. I understand why most parents may not agree to that. But you guys did. You said yes. It was incredible. That really launched a lot of my other adventurousness and gave me a lot of confidence, all those things. But across the board, like, I would say, because you kind of think about when kids are younger, I really think that's your time to, and I'm not a parent, so don't listen to anything I have to say about raising kids, because that's all going to bite me in the ass in a few years. But, like, when kids are younger, like, that's kind of your time to tell them what you think is right? But then when kids are, like, teenagers, they no longer want to hear what you think. Mm-hmm. But that's your time to kind of show them that, like, you're there for them. Right. It's like, you're not going to let your 7-year-old start making their own decisions and be like, okay, just call me if anything goes wrong. Like, that's not how it works. They don't have the capacity to think about that yet. But, like, by the time your kid's a teenager, you've probably repeatedly told them things. You've taught them values. You've taught them things like, don't drink and drive, right? Now they're a teenager, they know all that stuff. But that's the time in your life for everybody where you start testing boundaries, right? And that's kind of your time to not just berate them with stuff as much as sometimes you may want or need to, but that's your time to show them, I'm here if you need me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to loosen the reins a little. I'm going to let you experience things. And that's what you did with me. Like, I got to experience some things. I did some stupid stuff, did some great stuff, but regardless, y'all were still there. So I did some stuff wrong, got in trouble for some stuff, but still you were there. But I wouldn't have even experienced, like, if I had never experienced some stupid stuff because you guys let me go free a little, then I would have moved out on my own and done way worse stuff. Yeah. Because I had no understanding of that. So anyway,
it's a hard balance because you go back to, well, my kid's going to drink anyway, so I'm going to have a kegger for my teenager. No, don't do that. That's stupid. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Well, like, you had already, by the time you went to Costa Rica, you had already been to Puerto Rico and Nepal both.
Nepal was after.
Was Nepal between, or was Nepal between? Because if you went at 15 and 17.
Yes, I did Puerto Rico at 12. And then I did Costa Rica. Then I did Puerto Rico, then Nicaragua. Okay. Then Costa Rica. Then I did Nepal right before, like, weeks before I left for Costa Rica the second time.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did all that before I had even turned 17.
Yeah.
Which was awesome.
Yeah.
Just highly recommend. If your kid's annoying you, I
send them
suggest
to a
you
foreign
look
country.
up whatever country of a language that you think they should learn to speak. Just send them over there.
And again, it was what's it called?
CISA, Christian
CISA.
Immersion Spanish Academy in Tuis de Torrealba, Costa Rica. Highly recommend if you want to send your kid somewhere. Stitch them here.
There you go. And Faith is trilingual, English, Spanish, like a native speaker, and ASL because you're deaf in one ear. So you had that. And again, that kind of goes back to you weren't the greatest homeschool student. There were things that you liked and didn't like. But one of the motivating factors for Costa Rica was that she has an affinity for language.
Yeah.
This seems really interesting. Let's go have her do this. And it's paid off. Now as a paramedic in Atlanta, you use Spanish pretty much every day, right? Or multiple times a week, I would guess. And so, being able to say yes to that. Well, one of the things I really like is that now our relationship is now transitioning more to an adult friendship relationship, and obviously it's always going to be dad and daughter. I'm trying to transition more in that. Faith and I have a lot of conversations that drive her mom nuts because we tend to be more debating, friendly debate kind of a thing. But how has that transition been for you to transition into this adult relationship?
I think it's hard in some ways because I think there's still that part of me that's kind of that hard-headedness of like, I don't want you to be right about anything. So that's the part I haven't really ironed out yet of like, oh, we're both just adults talking about things. You have nothing to prove. But I think for me, in some capacity it is because I respect you so much. And I love mom. I highly value mom's opinion of me as well. But you and I have just always had a relationship where like, we fight so much because I respect you and value your opinion truly above pretty much anyone else in my life.
Thank you.
But for
That's
that,
probably a mistake, but appreciate that.
but for that reason, I think I still have that part of the transition is still a little harder. And I think, honestly, most people have that with their parents, even if you're in your 40s, so I think that part's been a little hard still. But for the most part, that transition has been super helpful because it's allowed me to feel more free to talk about my life as it is and be able to share more of myself and my life with you guys rather than talking about my life as I want you to hear it because you're my parents and I don't want to disappoint you.
Yeah.
But being able to talk about it more and like, this is what I'm doing. You may not love all of it, but at least you guys have accepted more of that friendship role in some ways so that instead of educating me on what you do and don't like about my life, you're able to hear it. And that allows us to have more of an open relationship. Because if we were still kind of in that, well, we don't think you should do this and we think you should do that, which is more the parental, which you're still my parents, we're still going to get some of that. But that would make me feel like I can't share as much of my life with you. And then we'd both be really missing out on a lot. So I think it's been a fun transition because now we get to be more open and honest with each other and it's not as high volatility as maybe it used to be.
Yeah. And honestly, with this podcast, one of the things we've talked about is I've been able to talk to so many different people. And I've grown actually in the last year just as a result of some of these conversations, which helps me to be more open and honest with you as well. And I will say that when your kids get to be adults and they move away to go kind of do their own thing, there is a certain comfort for the parents in not knowing everything, right? Like if your kids happen to live in your house or they live in the same town and you're intimately aware of everything they're doing, there is kind of a nice thing of like, go live your life. And I understand different economies, different family dynamics, all of those kind of things. If they live in the house, it may be for a good thing. But having that distance actually helps, both with you, with your sister. It's like, well, they can go have their own lives, but we're still involved. Like we talk several times a week and FaceTime all the time and all that. And so that's something that I really value and it's been great. So.
Yeah, me too. It's been fun.
This has been awesome. I appreciate you taking the time. I hope so. I'm sure some dads and daughters, maybe you can, if you like this episode, take an opportunity and listen to it with your daughter and, listen to it with your kids, get her opinion on what's been said, maybe open some conversations. So I think this is really valuable and really helpful. Thanks for calling on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Yeah. Love you, babe.
Love you too.
All right, guys, thanks very much. Have a good day.
Bye.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.